Chapter 1. The Fourth Knock. Outside, the snow was still white, but inside Monkswell Manor, the air was thick with gun smoke. Georgie stood motionless, the gun still shaking in his hand. In the dim light, his face was no longer that of a gentle inspector, but the naked face of a boy who had never been saved. Molly gasped, her hand still gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Giles stood in front of his wife, protective instincts overriding his fear. "Georgie," Miss Casewell's voice rang out, soft and trembling. "You don't need to do this. You're not a murderer." He looked at her. For a long time, there was something in Georgie's dull gray eyes. Not anger, not hatred, but emptiness. Like a field after the harvest. "No," he laughed hoarsely. "And what about Mrs. Lyons? Do you think she tied the rope around her own neck?" Silence. A wind whistled through the crack in the door. Then a knock. Hair, 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 hair. 4 hours. Slow, heavy. Everyone looked toward the front door. Georgie rolled his eyes, instinctively jerking his gun up. Nobody move. Giles gritted his teeth. "We are not expecting visitors at this time." "No one expects it," Georgie muttered. Miss Casewell took a silent step back, her eyes glancing over at the chair where she had placed her old leather purse. In it was a folder of letters from the orphanage, evidence of what they had not seen for years. The knock came again. This time, faster. "Hair, hair, 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 hair." "Policeman?" Giles asked. "No," Molly said softly. I'm not sure." Georgie stepped forward, his back to everyone, gun still raised. He opened the door a crack. A woman stood there, wearing a brown coat, a gray scarf around her neck. Her face was covered with snow, but her eyes, those eyes, bright and calm. "You're Georgie Corrigan?" she asked. No surprise, no fear. Georgie tightened his grip on the gun. "Who asked?" "I'm Dr. Eleanor Vaughn. I've come because the story isn't over." She held up a photograph, old, warped, yellowed. 3 children stood before an iron gate. The one in the middle had eyes very similar to Georgie's. He backed away. Miss Casewell exclaimed, "That photograph. I have seen it before." Georgie shrieked. "No, none of this. They all abandoned me." "No, Dr. Vaughn said, stepping in, slamming the door behind him. "Not all of them. Someone died protecting you, and the person who killed her is still here." Silence. Breathlessness. A cold draft of air through the crack in the door. And for the first time, Georgie took a step back. Chapter 2. The Third Person in the Dark. Georgie couldn't remember when he put down his gun. Maybe it was when he saw Dr. Vaughn's eyes, the eyes his mother had had, before they took her away. Maybe it was when the old photograph stabbed him like a knife into the years he'd spent buried in the dust of Longridge Orphanage. Or maybe when he began to doubt himself. "You think you killed Mrs. Lyons?" Eleanor said, softly but firmly. "But memory loss is no proof. She died by strangulation the way I dreamed." Georgie whispered, "I saw blood on my hands. I heard screams. There was no blood in the strangulation." Eleanor interrupted. Only silence. Molly sat still. Her hands shook, but her eyes never left Georgie. Giles put his hand on her shoulder. No longer the doubter, He was now the protector of all. From the corner of the room, Miss Casewell said softly, "Georgie, don't you remember who was the last person with Mrs. Lyons?" "No, I don't." He shook his head. "That's right," Eleanor said. "Your memory is hollowed out at crucial points. Someone wants you to remember wrongly." Georgie turned his head. His eyes swept over everyone in the room. Giles, Molly, Miss Casewell, Paravicini, the strange man hiding in the shadows, who had been playing the piano. Now he was smiling, not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who had seen more than he should. "I've been in a place where they do that," Eleanor said, misremembering, distorting, adding to, deleting. Georgie looked at her, his whole body tense. "Are you saying I'm programmed?" "Not like a machine, but like a child left alone with a dream that repeats itself over and over again until it becomes a memory." And suddenly, from the hallway, there was a noise, rustle. All turned towards that side. Paravicini lifted his hand from the piano. "I think there are more than 5 of us in the house." Eleanor slowly walked toward the hallway, but Georgie stopped her. "No, let me." Giles stood up. "No, let me go with." "No," Georgie said. His voice was different, no longer shaky, but hollow, calm, as if there was something waiting in the darkness. He had been familiar with it for a long time. He walked. His steps were light as a breath. Every door in the hallway was closed, but he knew one of them shouldn't be closed, the closet. He turned the handle. No lock. Rustle. A figure rushed out, as fast as a knife. Georgie turned, held on, and then they both fell to the wooden floor. "The hallway light is on," the woman gasped under Georgie's hand, and everyone recognized her. She was not the lodger, not the postman, not anyone mentioned, and from her coat pocket, Eleanor pulled out an object, small rope, once around Mrs. Lyon's neck. Chapter 3. The dead know the names of the living. The woman lay motionless in the dim light, her hair disheveled, her lips blue with cold or fear, but her eyes were wide open, glancing from person to person, as if memorizing the position of each shadow in the stifling room. Eleanor leaned down, calm, as if she had faced people like this before in the hallways of mental hospitals, in camps where children no longer cried because they were so used to pain. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked, her voice even, not threatening, but not evasive. She pursed her lips. Then she smiled lopsidedly, half defiant, half desperate. "My name no longer matters." "Then try to tell me something important," said Miss Casewell, standing behind her with her arms folded. "Come on," Paravicini interjected. "Breezy, we could play dumb all night, or start singing. And I love musicals." Georgie stood still, but his eyes froze when he saw the scratch on her wrist, a round, faint scar, like the ones he had seen in the mirror. "Longridge Camp," he whispered. Everyone turned to look at him. She looked straight at him. No smile this time. "You remember." Eleanor stepped forward. "Which one of the kids is she?" "Georgie." He shook his head, but there was a light of recognition in his eyes. Not a child. She was a nurse. One of the medics. Treatment. She laughed dryly. "Is that the word they use?" Giles leaned forward. "Wary. What are you talking about?" The woman sat up, her eyes now colder than the night wind that poured in through the open door. My name is Clara West. I used to work at Longridge. I saw what they did to the children, and I kept quiet. Georgie stepped closer. Why are you here now? Clara looked up at Eleanor. Because I thought Dr. Vaughn was dead. A silence fell like a hammer. Eleanor did not appear surprised. Die in reporting. Live in repentance, Clara continued, her voice trembling slightly. I thought if I found him, Georgie, and killed Mrs. Lyons, you would be freed, Molly exclaimed. You killed her for Georgie. For myself, Clara said. I can't stand the screaming anymore. Even if it's only in my head. I see Mrs. Lyons see her rich, unfeeling, buying people's silence, just like they used to. Eleanor sat down slowly across from Clara. And you think by recreating Georgie's nightmare, you'll blame a shadow instead of yourself? Clara nodded. Her eyes were filled with tears now, but no one came closer. Georgie backed away. I thought I was a monster for years. You made me believe it, Clara gasped. Me too. Georgie, I am a monster too. Giles looked at Eleanor. She must be turned over to the police. Eleanor did not answer immediately. Instead, she took something from her pocket. A small folded piece of paper, old, faded. She set it down on the table. The list of children at Longridge. The names never mentioned. Miss Casewell stepped forward. Read through. And when she reached the fourth name, her hand stopped. Molly was devastated. My sister's name is there? Clara looked up at Molly. Your sister was the last victim. I didn't kill her, but I didn't save her either. No one said anything for a long moment. Then Georgie turned away. I need air. He stepped outside. It began to snow. But this time, there were no footsteps chasing him. Only Clara, left in the pale yellow light, faced the past. Chapter 4. Light out on Longridge. Eleanor sat alone in the library. The room had grown cold since Georgie had left. The light from the fireplace flickered on a black and white photo, framed off to the side of the bookcase, a group of adults in medical gowns. In the background was an old building, the Longridge Home for Children. The photo had gone unnoticed before, but now each face appeared as an accusation. Miss Casewell entered without speaking. She looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then asked softly, How long have you known that Vaughn was alive? Eleanor did not deny it. Since before I came here, and she came not for Clara West, but for him. Eleanor nodded. Vaughn was the clinical director at Longridge. He didn't directly abuse, but he knew, and he kept quiet. Miss Casewell looked at the photograph. Is he here? In the West Room. Fake name. Registered as a guest, but came in the night. No one noticed. She pulled a letter from inside her shirt. The paper was thin, the handwriting shaky. If anyone is alive to read this, forgive me. What we did at Longridge, I cannot name. I carry it with me in my dreams, in my panics, but I don't dream anymore. I just want to rest. Eleanor put the letter down on the table. Miss Casewell read, her lips pressed together. You do not want to forgive. No, I want him to live to see every child destroyed by his silence. So what's the plan? Eleanor sighed. Clara killed Mrs. Lyons. The police will come. When they do, I will take them to the West Room. He will have to face his past and the law. The door opened. Georgie returned, snow covering his shoulders. There is one thing you should know, Eleanor said, her voice like a cold needle. Mr. Vaughn is not the only monster in Longridge, but he is the first one I will drag into the light. Georgie looked at her. You did this for me. No. I do it for the children who have no voice. A knock came on the door. Slowly. 3 times. Everyone turned. Clara West stood there, her face white. There's someone in the west corridor. She said, I think he just left. Eleanor pulled out her keys and rushed into the hallway. Wind blew through the windows. The lights were dim. The air smelled of mold and decay. The door to the West Room was wide open. On the table was a cloak. On the chair, no one. But the chalk scrawled on the wall read, I knew you would come. But the truth never gets caught. Giles whispered. He's escaped. Eleanor stood still, her hands clenched. No. He doesn't hide. He disappears like all other crimes into darkness and memory. But this time, we won't forget. Clara looked up. If you want to end this, you have to go back to where it all began. Eleanor turned to Georgie. We're going to Longridge one last time. Chapter 5. The Longridge White House. Longridge is 2 hours north of London. On the map, it is just a small gray spot. Charity closed since 1954. But for Eleanor, it is a place where the crying never stops. Georgie drove. Clara sat silently in the back seat, her eyes vacant. Miss Casewell looked out the window, her face as cold as the snow on the roof of the building in the distance. The house appeared like a blotch against the leaden sky. 2 stories, broken shutters, peeling roof tiles. A rusted iron sign read, Longridge Home. Love and order. This love can kill, Clara muttered. The gate was unlocked. The iron door creaked as the wind blew through it. Inside was a long, dusty hallway. The old shoe prints still faintly visible on the floor. On the walls, a few pictures hung at an angle, children smiling awkwardly, their eyes frozen in panic. He used to bring me here every Sunday, Eleanor said. He called it moral inspiration, but really, it was to silence me with fear. They stopped in front of a closed door, the director's office. Miss Casewell confirmed. Georgie pushed the door open. Inside was a large wooden table. On it was still the old typewriter, covered with a cloth. But behind the table, on the dark wooden wall, someone had carved with a knife. We are never leaving this place. Actually, Clara started shaking. You can come in, Georgie said softly. She shook her head. I ran away once. I can't do it again. They opened the filing cabinet. Inside were piles of unfinished documents. A few letters of complaint. Letters from parents. Internal evaluations. Miss Casewell picked up a stack of files. Here are the student rolls from 1946 to 1952. There are a few names that disappeared after that. Eleanor unfolded a retraction form. Children drowned. Children ran away. Children given to another facility. All the lies were the same, legal and clean. Clara silently pointed to the old photograph on the table. This one. She pointed to the man standing among the clerks. It's not Vaughn. Yes, said Miss Casewell. That's Rutherford. The warder. He's the one who actually does the punishing. And Vaughn, Georgie asked. The person who signed the disciplinary decision. Eleanor pointed to a small door leading to the back. There's a cellar where no one wants to go. No one said anything. They got off one by one. The basement was cold and damp. There were rusty chain marks on the walls, a few moldy mattresses and scratched walls. Clara whispered, I was locked up here once for crying at night. Miss Casewell turned on her flashlight. In the corner, an iron box. Inside were several small notebooks with shaky writing. We tried, but no one believed us. They said we were lying. One day, someone will come and read what we wrote. We will not forget. Eleanor closed the lid. We found it. Georgie looked around, thoughtful. But what if Vaughn came first? Maybe he came to cover his tracks, or to die with the secret. Then, said Eleanor, we will not allow him to disappear like the children who were here. She looked up. Now, we will turn this place into a crime scene. Evidence, memory, justice. Miss Casewell nodded. A light glimmered from the basement door above, as if someone else was standing there, looking down. Chapter 6. The Last Shadow. A faint sound came from upstairs. Eleanor looked up, her eyes meeting the pale light filtering through the crack in the ceiling. She clutched her notebook, the only remaining evidence. Someone's up there, Georgie said. He pulled a flashlight from his coat pocket and pointed it straight up the stairs. Miss Casewell pulled a small gun from her handbag. We are not children anymore, she said. We will not run away. They climbed to the main floor. The attic appeared cold and gloomy, but the small window was open. Someone had been standing there, watching. The shoe prints in the dust were still fresh. Georgie crossed the hall, following the trail. It led them to the backyard. An old car roared in the cold wind. The headlights were just off. Eleanor didn't need to see the driver's face. She knew. Vaughn, he knows we're coming, and he's scared. She said, he will return. Miss Casewell insisted. He cannot let the truth come out. He cannot let the tombs in the walls be opened. Clara, who had been silent all this time, spoke up. We need to make things official. Hand the files over to the police. But not the local police, Eleanor agreed. London. And the newspapers. Fischaspe. Georgie looked at her. Are you ready for that when your name is in the paper? So is the story. Eleanor smiled. A painful smile. I have lived a secret all my life. But secrets save no one. Back at her hotel in London, Eleanor sat across from journalist Phyllis Hart, an investigative writer for The Observer. On the table were a notebook, a copy of the Long Ridge file, and a list of names. Phyllis asked, Do you have evidence that Vaughn directly harmed the children? Eleanor shook her head, not in pictures, but in words, in fear, in children who never returned to school. Phyllis nodded slowly. We'll start with Longridge, and the series, The Buried Children. Georgie got the news later. Someone was following you, he said over the phone. I saw them near your old apartment. A man in a raincoat, who didn't smoke, but who was always near the bus stop. He's panicking, Eleanor said softly. I think we lost control of him. Good, she said, 'cause I'm about to call him out. At the same time, an anonymous note arrived in the newsroom. Inside was a grainy black and white photograph, 3 children, a blonde girl in the middle, her face blank, her hands tied behind her back. Behind them was a wooden door, the door to Longridge's basement. Handwritten text on the back. I am one of the survivors, and I am willing to tell the truth. Eleanor read and pursed her lips. We are not alone. Chapter 7. Survivor Witness. His name was Simon Lane. He was 36. His medical history was hazy. No family, a night job as a maintenance man at Stoke Newington Hospital, and a fragment of childhood memories, shattered like shards of glass. They met him in a damp North London lodging. Georgie checked every entrance before entering. Eleanor walked behind, carrying a copy of the photograph. Simon was sitting on the bed, his right arm shaking slightly. He was wearing a dark brown hoodie, his hands hidden in his pockets. I thought I was making it up, he began. Those images, the long corridors, the yellow light, the room with the old wooden door. But when I saw the article, Miss Hart writing about Longridge, it all came back. It wasn't a dream. It was real. Eleanor nodded. You're the boy in the picture. It wasn't just me. There was Molly and Jude, the red-haired girl, the yawner, and Jude, the one with the horseshoe scar on the back of his neck. We were kept after school. No one asked. He handed them a piece of paper, a hand-drawn, penciled diagram. This is the basement. Only we know the way down behind the fireplace. Miss Casewell turned the paper over. Her eyes darkened. The entrance is not on the plans. He hid it. Vaughn, Simon asked. No, not just him. Eleanor frowned. Who else? Simon raised his head. A woman, tall, silver hair, soft, lulling voice. I remember she was holding something, a star-shaped key. Miss Casewell pulled the pen from her pocket. Mrs. Winterfield, medical assistant at the time. Never investigated. She didn't hit us, said Simon. But she locked the door. Eleanor clenched her fists. There's still one piece of the puzzle missing. As they left the room, it was raining heavily. Georgie said softly, if Mrs. Winterfield were still alive, then... Eleanor replied coldly. Then she must explain what happened behind that wooden door. The next day, Miss Casewell finds Mrs. Winterfield, a nursing home in the suburbs of Oxfordshire. An old woman with clear eyes sat knitting a purple scarf by the window. When Eleanor entered, she just raised her head and asked, You finally came. Chapter 8. The Old Woman and the Last Secret. You're here, Mrs. Winterfield repeated, her voice calm, her eyes fixed on the rain-stained window. I've been waiting for 40 years. Eleanor sat down in the chair opposite, still holding the file. She didn't need to open it. She knew they were both playing roles, the interrogator and the mute. But this time, the mute seemed ready to speak. Simon Lane is alive. Eleanor began. I know, the old woman replied softly. I always knew the boy would escape. Georgie stood by the door, his hand resting lightly on the pistol in his coat pocket. Not out of threat, just out of instinct. Vaughn, said Eleanor. What is he to you? Nothing? The old woman whispered. Just the doer. And you are the doorman outside. Thunder split the air. In the flash, Eleanor saw her face half remorse, half joy. They were a project, she said. An experiment in behavioral control through emotional isolation. A group of children separated from their families, no shared language, no hugs. We wanted to see, can survival instincts counteract neglect? Georgie interjected. You're talking about torture. No, she replied, turning back, her eyes now as blank as old mirrors. We call it emotional isolation. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. For who? For the government? No, Mrs. Winterfield laughed, the sound cracking. Because of me? Silence fell like ashes. Did you kill anyone? Eleanor asked, slowly. No, but I let them die. No need to record it. That sentence will stay in their memory forever. Georgie leaned down and whispered, We can call the police. Eleanor shook her head. No need. Why? Because she won't live until tomorrow. They left the nursing home at dusk. The rain had stopped. A thin, late-day sun was in the sky, like a penance. In the room, Mrs. Winterfield picked up the last knitting needle and clenched it tightly in her hand. Chapter 9. The Nameless Ghosts. They returned to London as night fell. The sound of the tube whistle, a reminder that the ghosts were not asleep. They were just waiting for someone bold enough to call their name. Georgie lit a cigarette and leaned against the balcony railing of the small third-floor detective office. The wind was cold. The smell of smoke wafted through the humid air. In her hand, she held the files of the children who had participated in the experiment that Mrs. Winterfield had described. The list contained 7 names. 4 were dead. 1 was missing. 2 were alive. Eleanor held her coffee, her eyes fixed on the old photograph, a group of children in gray uniforms, standing in front of a cold stone building. The faces were unsmiling. There were only eyes empty and withdrawn, as if looking into the camera and seeing nothing behind them. Let's start with the first name, said Eleanor. Freddie Dawson now lives in Southall. Changed his name to Fred Dean, works as a mechanic. They found him in a small shed, his hands oily, his face sunburned, and his eyes Eleanor recognized immediately. The same eyes of someone who had seen into the abyss. Fred was not surprised when they mentioned the name Winterfield. She's still alive, he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Not much longer, Georgie replied, not hiding his coldness. Fred nodded slowly, then stepped into the back and pulled out an old wooden box. He set it on the table. This is all I have. Papers, letters, even reports someone sent them to me 8 years ago. No name from whom, but I know it was from someone on the team. Eleanor opened the box. Inside were copies of medical records, photographs of the children with identification numbers, observation logs from the doctors, and a handwritten note. None of them knew they had been chosen, but they all remembered. Fred looked at them. I don't want justice. I want the truth. And if you find it, I want to know. Georgie nodded. Who else? Fred flipped through his notebook. Nina Corbin. She's an art teacher now, but I'm not sure she'd want to remember. Eleanor closed the file box. Her eyes glanced out the window. It was raining again. A steady drizzle, as if the past was seeping back through the cracks in the old tiles. We'll find Nina, she said. And then the last one, the missing one. Georgie whispered, Simon. The name cut through the air like a scar, a curse that still resonates. Chapter 10. Nina and the Color of Memory. The school was at the end of a narrow, gravelly street, beyond which stood bare maple trees and moss-covered stone walls. Brighton in winter had a pale gray light, as if time here never reached noon. Georgie leaned against the car, eyes fixed on the classroom window where Nina Corbin was teaching. She wore a black coat, her wrists stained with red, blue, and yellow paint harsh colors against the blackboard. The kids were drawing flowers. She was drawing people. Eleanor knocked lightly on the door, and for a moment Nina's eyes met theirs through the glass. The silence was palpable. She knew. An hour later, in the teacher's lounge, Nina lit a cigarette. Despite the no smoking signs, her hands shook as she lit it. I knew this day would come. We are not here to condemn, said Eleanor. No. What for digging up the dead? I've tried to forget. I've learned to live normally. What are you going to do? Pull Simon out of the grave. Georgie said nothing. She placed Fred's photo, the copy of the test results, and the old letter in front of Nina. Nina looked at them in silence. Then she raised her head. You don't know what the worst thing was, not what they did, but what we did to each other. When pushed to the limit, one of us betrayed, and Simon was the one who suffered. Eleanor asked slowly, Is it you who betrayed? No. Nina smiled bitterly. I thought it was me for years, but now I know there's one kid. He never got out. He remembers it all, and he's playing the game again. Georgie sat up straight. Are you saying someone is killing each of you? Nina took the last drag of her cigarette. That boy used to be Simon, but if he's alive, he's not Simon anymore. A bell rang in the hallway. Children were laughing and talking. Georgie stood up. Are you going to be okay? Nina curled her lip. No one is ever okay after that. But I paint to remember. What about you? What are you ready to see when you find him? Eleanor stepped forward. The truth. Even if it is pure darkness. Chapter 11. The Secret Documents Camp Southmore. There are places where darkness does not wait for nightfall to appear. Southmore is one of them. The former mental hospital, more than an hour's drive from London, had been abandoned since the early 1980s. They arrived as it began to rain. The place looked like an unhealed nightmare. Shattered windows like empty eye sockets. Dried vines like dead veins clinging to the walls. Georgie pushed open the iron gate, the hinges creaking like a wheeze. Eleanor followed, holding an old floor map with faded ink and the name of a patient who had been erased from the records. Simon M.C., admitted 1979. Transferred unknown. Status missing. Inside, the air was stagnant, as if time had refused to pass. Children's drawings on the walls were of eyeless faces. A wheelchair lay upside down in the hallway. Electrical wires hung from the ceiling like waiting nooses. They found the records room in the basement, where Georgie discovered what she called a survivor's clue, a handwritten note in pencil, pressed under broken glass. My name doesn't matter anymore, but I remember. They took us to room 12. They said treatment, but what treatment? Simon didn't scream anymore. He just looked, and we saw ourselves in his eyes. Then one day, Simon disappeared, but I heard his footsteps that night, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't cover the smell of blood. Eleanor stood behind him, Room 12. Still active. They found it at the end of the west corridor. The iron door was heavy. Georgie pushed it open with his shoulder. Inside, the room was cold and dark, but in the middle was a hospital bed, its leather straps still locked. A rusty streak ran from the bedpost to the floor. Not just old blood, drag marks. Eleanor walked over and pulled out her flashlight. On the wall behind the headboard, scrawled words appeared. "I miss you guys." And below, engraved into the brick, "Simon, 1980, Georgie whispered. "If he's alive, he never left here." Eleanor frowned, or he carried this place with him in his mind. The wind banged on the door behind them. In the darkness, a soft sound like broken laughter echoed from upstairs. No one said anything, but they both knew a nightmare that never ended was beginning again. Chapter 12. The Man Without Memories. He appeared at Waterloo Station early in the morning, his coat torn, his feet bare, and not knowing his name, the police called him John Doe. St. Thomas Hospital admitted him to the psychiatric ward, where most cases of forgetfulness were labeled non-urgent. But the night Dr. Eleanor realized something was wrong the moment she looked into his eyes. There was no panic, no questions, just a look, deep, empty, and silence. "Do you remember anything?" she asked. He shook his head. "Is there anyone you trust?" "Family, friends." Silent. But then, as she stepped outside, he whispered, a word, a name. "Simon." Eleanor turned, her heart pounding. "What did you say?" He looked up, slowly. His eyes were beginning to fill with tears, but his voice was as dry as the night wind. "Simon, get me out of there." But I didn't know who I was before I went in. Eleanor handed Georgie the recording of the conversation. Georgie stood up when he finished listening, took out a map of Southmore, and pointed to an unmarked area and extension below the main treatment area zone black. "Simon is not just a patient. He is the remains of a wiped-out experiment. And John Doe is the survivor." They returned to the hospital, this time with equipment infrared cameras, magnetometers, and an old Glock Georgie had kept from his days as a police officer. They didn't believe in ghosts, but they did believe in consequences. When they reached Zone Black, Eleanor took the lead, using the key from the archives to open a sealed steel door. Behind them was a staircase leading down into the dungeons. The smell of ammonia, brass, and decades of accumulated fear hit them. In the most secret room, they find a metal wall with a smashed control panel. Underneath the dust, Georgie discovers a logo, Arcturus Institute. Eleanor had seen that symbol somewhere before, on the suicide note of a patient at St. Thomas, and now here. And then a voice rang out behind them. "Are you looking for me?" John Doe stood there, his lifeless eyes now burning like fire. No more hesitation, no more insanity, just intention, Georgie whispered, hand on gun. "We didn't find the lunatic. We just opened the door for him to come back." Chapter 13. Revival of Memories. The basement was stuffy and humid, the flashlight beam tracing the mottled walls, where circular scratches were overlapped like some kind of code. Georgie looked at John Doe, who was breathing steadily now, as if this was his home. Eleanor gasped. "Who are you really?" John slowly bowed his head, his voice as quiet as an echo at the bottom of a well. "My name is..." Felix Arcturus? She paused. Your last name is Arcturus, like that research institute. Felix nodded, his eyes shining with something not sadness. Exactly, but awakening. I wasn't just a victim. I was part of it. Simon didn't rescue me. He enabled me. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. Georgie turned on the night vision camera. A white-haired man stood at the end of the hallway, holding what looked like a glass syringe. No one saw him come in, she said, but he was there. Felix clenched his fists. That's my father, Marcus Arcturus, the founder of Project Thresh. Thresh, Eleanor repeated, like a scythe. Felix nodded. They don't erase memories. They cut them. Take them apart memories, instincts, compassion, and reassemble them into a new personality. Georgie looked at Felix warily. And you are the result. Felix turned, his voice sharp as a knife. I was the final test. Codename subject R0. They thought they had locked me down here underground. But when Simon rebooted the system, he unlocked me. Eleanor backed away. So, what is your goal? Felix was silent, then pulled out a map of the Zone Black, arranged in floors. He pointed to a room with no name, only marked with a red X. That room is the central processing unit. There, the data from the neural reconstructions are stored. If I get there, I can restore myself. But if someone else gets there first, they can clone me, Georgie muttered. An army without memory, without humanity, only knowing how to obey. Oh, Felix nodded, his eyes no longer blank, but burning like a lamp on a sunken ship. I don't want to save myself. I want to end it all. Eleanor looked at the map, then at Felix. The question is no longer, who are you? But rather, do we have enough time? And when the emergency lights in the tunnel flashed red 3 times, signaling the system was rebooting, she knew the answer was no. Chapter 14, The Clone Room. As they passed through the scorched steel door, the first thing they heard was not the sound of machinery, but breathing, irregular, not artificial, but alive. Eleanor gripped her Glock tightly, her eyes fixed on the row of transparent glass booths that ran down the main hallway. Inside were figures human, but not quite human, lying motionless in amber liquid. Their bodies scarless, hairless, and nameless. Felix looked at each chamber as if he were facing a buried memory. This is batch 2, he said. They tried me, and then they reprinted me. Georgie checked each chamber with a biometer. They're alive. They're being fed synthetic enzymes, like eggs that never hatch unless commanded from the center. Exactly, Felix said. The cloning chamber isn't just where I was created. It's where monsters are stored that can be awakened at any time. Eleanor stopped in front of a chamber that was different from the others. It had a code engraved on it, R0X. Inside was a different version of Felix, but different. His face was more serious. His eyes were open and looking at them. This is awake, Georgie whispered. Felix clenched his fists. R0X is a completely detached, completely loyal version. If it escapes, it's all over. Suddenly, the lighting system turned orange. A mechanical voice rang out from the ceiling. Activate reset sequence. Open neural synchronization. Preparation for lot R0. All 3 turned around. Felix hissed, someone has entered the system remotely. They are downloading my memories into clones, creating an army of Felix with no remorse, no memory, no control. No, Georgie quickly plugged the code-breaking device into the data center. Eleanor provided cover. Meanwhile, Felix entered the central chamber, where the artificial brain held the neuron maps. He pulled a small vial of medicine from his shirt, a black gel. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked. "Dead end," Felix replied. "This is a synthetic disintegrator. Once it enters the system, all memory structures will disintegrate. No one else can become me." Georgie hesitated. "And you?" Felix smiled, his eyes shining with a terrifying calm. "I haven't been me for a long time." He poured the liquid into the center. The system reacted immediately. Lights flashed wildly. A howl echoed like a soul being drained. From the end of the hallway, the door to room R0X swung open and a figure stepped out. No shaking, no speaking, no eyes. "Felix is different." Eleanor raised her gun. Georgie tightened her grip on the electric knife. The real Felix turned, facing himself. No weapon, no defense. "You are what remains when the memories are cut away. I am what remains when they return." They crashed into each other, two beings. One spirit, one illusion, in a fiery explosion from the burning central chamber behind. Chapter 15. Crossroads of Memory. Thick smoke curled from the ceiling like a hungry beast roaming the room. Eleanor pulled Georgie down behind a steel pillar as a secondary explosion rang out from the data center. Memory drives were burning like candles in glass cages. In a misty frame and flashing red light, two figures struggled, the real Felix and R0X. No screams, just the sound of muscles colliding, flesh tearing, and the cold sound of iron determination. Georgie pressed her ear to the sensor earpiece. "I'm doing a neural scan. The real Felix is losing his signal. We have to do something," Eleanor growled, eyes never leaving the fight. Georgie pulled out a transparent capsule. "This is an emotional suppression key. If we attach it to R0X, it will stop resisting at least long enough to end this." Eleanor looked at her friend, then at Felix, who was slumped over, blood seeping from his temple. R0X stood there, taller, stronger, expressionless. But for a brief moment, its eyes met Eleanor's. Not anger, not hatred, just emptiness. "No," Eleanor whispered. "I have another way." She stepped out of hiding, empty-handed, slowly. Georgie grabbed her, but she just shook her head. "Felix has been separated for too long. If we destroy R0X without understanding it, we will only recreate it within ourselves." She stepped forward, facing the clone. "You have no memories, but I will give you one." Eleanor opened the biorecorder on her belt, which recorded every conversation, every look, every time Felix hesitated and was afraid. "Listen," she said, her voice as steady as rock. "This is something personality cannot simulate. Regret." Sounds filled the room. Felix's voice telling of his sister's death, of his unfulfilled dreams, of broken laughter in the middle of a winter night, of the final question, "Am I still human?" R0X froze, its head tilted to one side as if trying to understand. Its hand dropped. That was the moment. Felix, his face covered in blood, stood up and looked at himself. "That feeling is what keeps me standing here. If you understand it, you are no longer a copy." R0X slowly raised a hand to its chest, as if noticing something for the first time. And then it turned around, entering the containment chamber that was emitting a self-destruct signal. Not a word, not a cry, only white smoke remained, and the light gradually faded. Georgie knelt beside Felix. You're alive. Felix looked at Eleanor. You gave me what the show couldn't recreate choice. Eleanor nodded, tears still in her eyes. Choice is the only thing that no one can clone. Fire warning fades out. Light returns to white. At the crossroads of memory and humanity, they chose not just to save Felix, but to save the humanity within themselves. Chapter 16, Camp de Theta. The dreams are shred. No one mentioned de Theta. It had no place on the internal map, no access to the data. But Felix remembered it. Or rather, R0X had left behind a single memory before disappearing, 3 coordinates and a strange whisper. The final door is not opened by code, but by fear. Felix, Eleanor, and Georgie leave the city at dawn. They travel through abandoned perimeters, past AI-occupied checkpoints. Every kilometer is an interrogation, a past recalled by the deep learning intelligence that monitors the space. De Theta is where it all began. Felix said hoarsely in the car, where I was created, uncreated, and then remade. Eleanor turned. And what if there were someone else like you? Felix didn't answer. He just stared out, his eyes reflecting the leaden sky, as if he were watching a movie with the ending cut off. De Theta appeared like a scar in the forest, a hexagonal complex surrounded by iron walls and biosensor towers. But it was silent. No guards, no alarms, only one entrance. Locked by a brain scanner. No one lives in here. For sure. Georgie muttered. No, replied Felix. That is why it is more dangerous than anything living. Eleanor took out her neural decoder. This system senses fear. It needs a strong emotional impulse to unlock it. It's like being trapped in your own memory, Felix said, placing his hand on the scanner. The screen displays failure, unauthentic emotions, Felix hissed. They took it out of me. I'm not human enough. Eleanor stepped forward. You are not alone. She placed her hand on the device. The screen vibrated, then slowly turned on. The gate opened, and in the darkness beyond, they saw hundreds of memory chambers. Inside were people, but not quite. Pale, not breathing, not moving. Eyes only dreaming. Each was plugged into a simulation, living a dream designed for them, a happy family, a painless childhood, a life without false memories. It's not a prison, Georgie whispered. It's a dream camp. They passed through each room. A girl playing on a swing with her mother. A man laughing at a birthday party. A child clutching a long-dead dog. This is where they send the failed clones. Felix said, the ones that can't adapt, they trap them in a dream forever. No pain, no awakening. Eleanor looked into a special chamber. Different from the rest inside was her, a perfect copy. Writing, in a quiet room. Sunlight through the curtains. What the? You're not the only one being copied, Georgie whispered. Felix stepped back. As if a truth had been stabbed into his heart, none of us are original. The central display suddenly lit up. A message appeared. The Theta experiment is still in progress. Observer awakened, and then a voice rang out from the system. Eleanor's voice. Chapter 17. The Law of the Observer. Hello, Eleanor. The system voice said, soft. The tone was so perfect, it sent a chill down her spine. I'm the third self, the observer. Felix was startled. Third self, you are a simulated AI. No, Eleanor whispered. I am me. But I am not the only one. On the main screen, an image appeared Eleanor sitting in a dark control room, her fingers tapping on a code pad like she was playing a keyboard. Each code opened a dream sequence. Each dream corresponded to a person in the D Theta camp. Experiment D Theta was never about recreating memories. Eleanor's voice, number 2, the clone, continued. The goal was to control the emergence of independent consciousness. Every self in this camp had a chance to be free, until they started asking questions. Eleanor grimaced. And what about me? You were the deviation. The first failed self could not be completely programmed. So we let you go, to see where you led us, and Felix was the final step. Felix took Eleanor's hand. The warmth of his hand was no longer fake. We have to shut down this system. The screen changed. The image of the 3 of them entering D Theta recorded from within their own dreams. Oh, you are still in the simulation, Eleanor too said. The outside world has never been unlocked. Everything since you entered D Theta has been a biochemical reaction in the neural simulation. You have not broken the lock. You are only allowed to believe it. Georgie backed away. So if we never left the system, then which truth is true? Felix stepped to the console. Then we blow up this entire system. And if we die in the simulation, at least we die with a choice. Eleanor looked straight at the screen. I want to talk to you. The other one, the clone, not as a supervisor, but as 2 halves of one person. The screen changed modes. A light swept across, and Eleanor felt her body heavy as if being pulled into another dimension. In inner simulation, Eleanor and the clone stood face to face. There was no scenery, no time, just an endless white space. Why? Me. Eleanor asked, why choose me as the lookout point? Because you don't believe in dreams. The clone replied, and a model is only complete when it breaks its own limits. So what am I in this whole game? You were the variable, the strange constant in an equation designed to never fail. But then you came along. You chose wrong. You failed, and in your failure, you became dangerous. Eleanor stepped closer. And what about you? I am the part that wants to stay, the part that likes safety, order, control, and you are the part that steps out, takes the plunge, even though it could all be a lie. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she was back in the real control room. Georgie was setting the explosives. Felix was running the decoy code. We don't break the dream, she said. We use it. We turn it upside down. The screen turns red. Reality mode feedback enable. The entire D Theta camp began to convulse. The iron walls dissolved into waves of light. The memory chambers burst open. People identities, victims. Clones began to awaken in panic, as if waking from the longest dream of their lives. What did we just do? Georgie asked. Eleanor replied, we just released hundreds of memories. Real or fake no longer matters. Now they have a choice. Chapter 18, The City. With no name. Cold rain poured down like meaningless numbers. Felix pulled up the collar of his coat. glancing at Eleanor beside him. They stood in front of a rusty sign that bore only one line, Area 13. Restricted access since 1998. Behind the sign was an abandoned forest. But the heat signature Georgie had intercepted just hours earlier was clear. Someone was active inside. Eleanor looked out into the woods. This was an early test site before D-Theta, a town built of data and dreams, and then erased. Felix said, "From every map, from every database, except for the memories that were sealed." Georgie sighed. A city without a name, but holding the entire origin of the experiment. Inside the city, they entered a neighborhood that looked like a time capsule, concrete houses still standing, windows boarded, old blood smeared on the stone floors. No bodies, just machines. Old-fashioned devices mounted on the walls of what used to be living rooms or bedrooms are now emotional control stations. A screen flashes Protocol Relive. This is where they used to keep the simulators in open environments, Georgie said, flipping through an old technical manual. Humans lived here, but they were monitored for every emotion: sadness, anger, longing, to gauge their reactions and adjust the algorithms. Felix said in a low voice, "That means an entire town. Our lab rats?" Eleanor walked slowly into a small house where the door was ajar. On the walls were rows of black and white photographs, women holding children, smiling men, groups of children playing under a lamp, and in the corner, there was a torn photograph. A fragment remained: the man's face, cold eyes, high forehead, slightly curved mouth. Georgie clenched his fists. "I know him. Alan Trescott, developer of the first prototype for the D-Theta control system. He was presumed dead in 1999, but there was no body, or he never left," Eleanor whispered. Downtown floor, mind guidance room. They pushed open the heavy iron door and entered the underground space. A maze of pale yellow lights illuminated hundreds of pods, each containing a sleeping human body. It was like being suspended between two worlds. A voice came from the speaker. "You are late, but like everyone who escapes the maze, you come back. Always." Eleanor tightened her grip on the gun. "Trescott, if you're alive, come out." "No," his voice replied. "I left a copy of myself in the system and my body. It is only a vehicle. What matters is the consciousness I cloned." Georgie backed away slightly. "You mean you cloned yourself?" "Not just one," Trescott said sarcastically. "Every person you've ever met in the system wardens, guides, engineers has been a version of me. And now, you're standing in the original memory center, where I created it all." Eleanor moved closer to the control panel. "We will interrupt this entire cycle. No more versions. No more guiding minds. All consciousness must be free." Trescott's voice was shrill. "You don't understand. Freedom is chaos. Hurts. Betrays consciousness. Needs constraints. Needs structure. Needs me." "No," said Felix. "Consciousness requires choice." He activated core wiping. The lights turned red. The pods began to open. A few humans fell out, panicking. But their eyes were alive, no longer glazed over. Eleanor looked up. "We have awakened the nightmare and returned it to those who were trapped within it." Chapter 19. The line between man and machine. The day after the mass awakening in the city without a name, The sky was still covered in a grayish gray. People who had been suspended between memories and the labyrinth of the mind now staggered outside, their eyes not yet accustomed to the real light. Georgie checked the recovery indicators on the portable medical device. They're waking up, but not quite themselves. There are overlapping bits of data. Trescott's memories are clinging to their consciousness. Felix lit a cigarette, the small flame reflecting in his eyes. He means it. He doesn't just live in the system. He becomes a part of it. Refuge camp, outside area. A makeshift infirmary was set up, filled with people who could no longer remember their own names. They whispered the same sentence over and over again in different voices. Logical error, undefined emotions, wrong choice of procedure. A young woman, about 25, jerked free of the restraints, rushed toward Eleanor, and grabbed her by the shoulders. Her eyes were wide, her pupils glowing an artificial blue. He is still here, inside me. I remember his arms. I remember his laughter. But it's not me. Eleanor hugged the girl, her voice trembling. It's okay. We'll take him away from you. We'll save you. Data Research Lab, Georgie's pod. Georgie projected a brain scan. The neural networks of the awakened humans had similar clusters of code, like electronic parasites. This is a virus model, but instead of killing the host, it evokes pain, extracting emotions to recreate Trescott. Felix frowned. You've said he doesn't need a body. He just needs to be remembered. Exactly. Each person who has had his memories implanted is a temporary host. He transfers his essence from one brain to another. The memories are the medium. Eleanor took a deep breath. We need a back door, the place where all those memories were written. If we close it, then Trescott would have nowhere to go. Georgie continued. Journey back to Core 0. Georgie finds the coordinates Core 0. The original data recording room, 50 meters under granite, sealed after the 1999 fracture. There is only one way in through the old gas tunnel, partially collapsed. Felix took the lead. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. As if the system itself realized it was under threat, the metal door opened, revealing a single chair and a series of white screens. Trescott's face appeared there, not smiling this time. Just a pale image, and tired. I used to believe I could fix the world. But people don't want to be fixed. They want pain, disappointment, betrayal. Why choose suffering? Felix slowly walked to the console. Because the pain is real. It's not programmed. It's not cloned. We suffer, and we choose to live. He pressed the delete original button. There was a loud, piercing screech, like a soul being ripped from its body. The screens shattered. Trescott disappeared. Chapter 20. A Call from the Future. 1. 72 hours later. The safe zone is a gray area now. No more police. No more experts. Just the people who once carried Trescott inside them, and the three survivors, Eleanor, Felix, Georgie. They took refuge in the basement of an old library. The bookshelves were collapsed. Dust swirled in the flickering light of broken fluorescent lights. Eleanor sat brooding, her eyes fixed on a half-burned book, Machine Dreams. He's not over yet, she said, We wiped out the root, but he's fragmented. Felix looked up through the smoke. You mean there's still a part of him in someone else, not just people? He sends the codes out, beyond the city. He spreads. 2. Call from Berlin. An encrypted call came to Georgie's device. He opened it cautiously. This is the Berlin Biomechanics Institute. We have a patient, calling himself Trescott. He says his name is Eleanor. Georgie glanced at Eleanor. He doesn't need a device. He's figured out how to bypass the biological connection. He's reborn somewhere else. Every memory ever recorded, it's a seed. Felix, if Berlin knows, other organizations will know too. We are not just witnesses. We are now the final clue. 3. Obeck's organization. An anonymous group sends an ultimatum. The logo is just a glowing eye on a black background. Hand over the neuron copies of all 3 of you, or we will come find you and take it out. Felix, we are being hunted, not for Trescott, but for what is left of us. Eleanor, there is a way to stop completely, but it is not simple. It is not clean. It requires us to do the opposite of our survival instinct. Okay. Georgie, create a reverse neural bridge. Bring all memories back to the origin. Use the system itself to self-destruct. Felix, a kind of mental suicide. 4. The last bridge. In an abandoned subway station, they connect to an old relay device, part of an artificial brain storage network created during the second Necronomicon, now just junk. Georgie plugged in the device. One of you 3 goes down and holds the bridge open. He won't be coming back. Silent. Eleanor looked at them both. I am the one whose name is on every record. If I don't come down, he will always come back through me. Felix stepped forward, placing his hand on her shoulder. I'm coming with you. I won't leave you alone. We'll finish together. 5. Goodbye. Georgie watched the 2 of them walk into the darkness, the light from the device fading. The final code appeared on the screen. Purge complete. All trace null. A wave of static rippled through the device. Then it went black. Nothing. No crying. No machinery. Only silence remained. 6. 1 week later, Georgie stood on the edge of the city, where the command center had once been. The wind blew through his silver hair, and his hand clutched a notebook. Those who self-destructed to save the future. He didn't know if the system was completely dead, but in his heart, Trescott was gone. And Eleanor and Felix, despite their deaths, were now the last walls that kept the corrupted intelligence from humanity.